Good afternoon. Today I'm going to talk about the heat of the moment, the effects of sexual arousal on sexual decision by Arian and Lowenstein, written in 2006. The motivation behind me choosing this study came about from two sources. One, the chapter on sexual assault, and two, just evolutionary theory. I was intrigued from the chapter's readings about the cold to hot empathy gap by Lowenstein, the study by Lowenstein in 1996, as well as shocked by the figures that stated that 20 to 25% of women, college-age women, experience a completed or attempted act of rape. Again, from the evolutionary perspective, I was also intrigued by the fact that theories believe that men engage in rape or sexually coerce women in order to increase their reproductive success. Put simply, Arian and Lowenstein wanted to test the effects of sexual arousal on three aspects of judgment and decision-making by college-age men. The three aspects were attractiveness to different activities, risky sexual behavior, and willingness to engage in questionably moral behavior to procure for sex. Given the scope and given the time, I'm only going to focus on the morally questionable behavior, as well as because I was just interested from the readings on this topic. Now, the hypothesis. Essentially, men, when looking at images like this and are aroused, underestimate the influence of emotional arousal on preferences and their decisions. You can laugh here, it's a funny image. To the methodology. It's a little convoluted, but let me help you go through it. Essentially, they recruited 35 college male students and randomly assigned them to three conditions. You had the N condition, or the non-arousal condition, where participants were given a computer with a screen and keyboard and told to take a questionnaire at home. Then you had the arousal condition, which was called the AN condition, where participants were shown sexually explicit images on the screen. I'll further explain this on the second slide because it's a little more complex than just the image. And then the third condition, which was the prior arousal, where participants were given a questionnaire, shown a sexually explicit image on the second day after they returned the first questionnaire, and then also told to do a non-arousal questionnaire. It's sort of convoluted, but at the end, you had the N condition, the arousal condition, and then the prior arousal condition. The answers to the arousal condition were similar within subjects and across the subjects, so they decided to collapse them into one, and the same thing was done for the arousal period. Meaning that they just essentially, when analyzing the results, they looked at two states, the arousal and the non-arousal. Again, like I said, the arousal condition was a little convoluted, but as you can see here from the image, you have three panels. You have the far left panel has a sexually explicit image. Not this one, but like a pornographic image, for example. And then on the right-hand side of the panel, you have an arousal meter, which will be significant. I'll explain further. And then you have at the bottom, on the bottom panel, you have the questionnaire, which had also a scale from no to probably in the middle to yes on the far right. The arousal meter was significant because in order to answer a question, you needed to be above the 75% arousal. And essentially what ended up happening was you took the computer to your home, you essentially self-stimulated yourself, i.e. masturbated, with your dominant hand, and then with your non-dominant hand you used a keypad. And in the keypad, as you can see, yeah, it's a little weird, as you can see from the keypad, you can input the arousal meter, or your selection, by using this hand side of the meter, and then you toggle through the images using the left-hand side of the keypad, and you submitted the questions using the bottom two pads. Now to the results. They tested the results. They used statistically significant data. The results were statistically significant, and they used a 5x2 ANOVA test. 5 being the questions, 2 being the arousal states. Let me run through the questions for you just to show you the significance of them. The first question, as you can see, deals with suggesting or taking your date to a fancy restaurant in order to increase your chances of having sex with her. The second question dealt with telling your date that you'd love her and that you actually do love her so that you increase your chances of having sex with her. It's kind of interesting. The third question dealt with telling or suggesting to your partner to have a drink in order to increase your chance of having sex with her. The fourth one, which again was what I was intrigued by, essentially said, would you keep trying to have sex with your partner after she says no? And here, as you can tell, it's statistically significant. The p-value is less than 0.05, actually less than 0.001. What's more important here is the difference, which I'll explain on the next slide. And lastly, of course, you had the question on would you pretty much drug your date in order to have sex with her. As you guys have all seen this graph from the book, what I want you to focus on are the third, fourth, and fifth questions, which is what I'm interested in, the effects of arousal on morally questionable behavior. And more specifically, if you look at the difference here, is on the no. The difference, as you can tell, on the x-axis you have the interest and willingness of the participants, and then on the y-axis you just have the questions. But here, I think what's really important is the difference, the percentage difference here, compared to other questions as well. You see that when aroused, people will actually want to, quote-unquote, try to rape a woman or force her to have sex with you even though she says no. Although the study was well conducted, it still had its limitations. For example, the sample size. It was way too small, only 35 students. And then the second thing was the lack of control over the setting, meaning that they couldn't physiologically test the arousal. It was all self-administered. And lastly, that they just focused on men. So you can't generalize to women. In conclusion, Arian and Lowenstein clearly demonstrated that sexual arousal does have a significant influence on morally questionable behavior when it comes to trying to obtain sex. It seems as if sexual arousal limits scope and creates a form of tunnel vision for males. Ultimately, the goal being to have sex with the female or date or hypothetical situation that you're in. I propose that if more men and women are aware of the effects of judgment and decision-making for males when aroused, fewer rape cases could be experienced in college campuses. Thank you.